Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. Captain Daniel Ross was accustomed to the vast loneliness of space. As the commander of the Starwing, a deep space exploration vessel, he spent most of his days charting unknown sectors, collecting data on distant worlds, and living in the hum of an automated life. The crew, consisting mainly of scientific personnel, was a small one, just 10 individuals, and the isolation suited him. With the galaxy's stars stretching endlessly around him, he found comfort in the stillness. But that stillness was shattered one cold morning when a distress signal crackled over the communication system. The voice was alien, soft, strained, and frantic. It was not one he recognized. His pulse quickened, and without hesitation, he ordered the ship's course to change. Within moments, the Starwing was gliding toward the coordinates sent by the mysterious distress signal. As the ship neared the source, a small uninhabited moon came into view, bathed in the pale glow of its distant sun. The surface appeared fractured, scarred by something that looked like an impact, with large craters and deep fissures. Among the wreckage, one ship stood out. The vessel was unlike any that Daniel had ever encountered, sleek, dark, and evidently damaged. Its hull was pockmarked, blackened as if it had been through hell. The Starwing's engines hummed as it descended, Daniel's hand firmly gripping the controls. He ordered a full scan of the alien ship. There was no sign of life aboard, but the distress signal was still faintly coming through. It was coming from inside the wreckage. "Prepare a landing party," Daniel ordered his crew. "We need to find out who or what sent that signal." The airlock opened with a hiss, and the team stepped out onto the desolate surface of the moon. Their boots crunched against the rocky terrain as they made their way to the wrecked vessel. The alien ship's hull was cracked, its metal surface dented and charred, as though it had crash-landed or been in a fight. The faint hum of energy still echoed from within. With their weapons drawn and scanners activated, they entered through a breach in the ship's side. The inside was dark, the air stale, and the walls were lined with strange symbols. Daniel's team moved with caution, their boots echoing in the empty corridors. Then they found her. She was lying on the cold metal floor of what appeared to be a command center. Her long, silken hair, pale and shimmering like the moon, was tangled around her delicate features. Her alien form was beautiful but undeniably fragile, her skin a soft lavender hue, her slender limbs adorned with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. She was unlike any species Daniel had ever seen. Her eyes fluttered open as she heard their footsteps, and she struggled to sit up, her breathing ragged. Daniel felt a strange pull in his chest as their eyes met. There was a desperation in her gaze, something raw, something human. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked, his voice softer than he intended. "What happened? Who did this to you?" She winced as she tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, help me," she gasped. I need your help." His eyes narrowed with concern. "What's your name? Where are you from?" She seemed to gather the strength to sit up fully, her hands trembling. I'm Livia, from the planet Til Eris," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "My ship was attacked. I don't know who did it. Please, I need a safe place. I don't have anyone left." Daniel's team exchanged uncertain glances. They had never encountered a species like her before, but there was no denying the sense of vulnerability she radiated. "We can help you," Daniel said, stepping closer, his hand instinctively reaching out to support her. "We'll get you back to our ship, and we'll figure this out together." Livia's eyes shimmered with gratitude, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but then her expression changed. She looked terrified for a split second, as though the mention of help brought something else to her mind, something darker. "Please," she whispered again, clutching his arm with surprising strength, "you don't understand. I need more than just help. I need someone to stay with me, to protect me. I can't survive alone. Please, I need a partner." The word caught Daniel off guard, and he looked at her in confusion. "A partner?" Her trembling hands reached for him again. "Yes, you don't know how dangerous this galaxy can be. I can't do it alone. My people, we are dying. The war, it's still going on. Please, I have no one left. You have to stay with me. Daniel felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. What she was asking was far beyond what he had been trained for. But there was something in her eyes, something desperate, something that made him want to say yes, to protect her, to keep her safe. Daniel began, but his words faltered. I don't know if... Livia closed her eyes and sank into the floor, her face contorted in a silent plea. Please, I can't lose anyone else. There was a long silence, and Daniel found himself looking down at her. His team was watching from behind him, uncertain, yet also moved by the alien beauty's vulnerability. Finally, he spoke. You have me, Daniel said softly, offering his hand. I will help you. I will take care of you. Livia's eyes shot open, and for the first time, a soft, grateful smile tugged at her lips. It was fragile, but it was there. I knew you'd understand, she whispered, her voice filled with both relief and something else, something Daniel couldn't place. The journey back to the Star Wing was silent, the quiet punctuated only by the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional crackle of static from the communication systems. Daniel walked beside Livia as they made their way through the narrow hallways of the ship, her fragile form leaning heavily on him for support. The rest of the crew was at their stations, the tension in the air palpable as they processed the sudden arrival of an alien, one that was far more than just a survivor of some unknown conflict. Livia's presence was mesmerizing. Despite her obvious weariness, she carried herself with an ethereal grace, as though she was not quite of this world. The soft glow of her skin seemed to reflect the dim lights of the ship, giving her an almost otherworldly appearance. But her eyes, those deep, starry eyes, betrayed the pain she carried. They were haunted, as though she had seen things no one should ever witness. Daniel kept glancing at her, his mind racing. What did she mean when she said she needed a partner? Was she asking for protection, or was there something more to it? A part of him wanted to understand, wanted to know what drove her to such desperation, but another part of him feared the answer. They arrived at the medical bay, where Dr. Eleanor Shaw was waiting. The physician was a no-nonsense woman in her early 40s, with short-cropped hair and a reputation for getting to the heart of any situation. She gave Daniel a questioning look as he guided Livia onto the examination table, her eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned the alien woman. Is she okay? Dr. Shaw asked, her voice steady, though there was a hint of curiosity in her tone. She's been through a lot, Daniel said, his voice tight. Can you do a full check? See what we're dealing with? Dr. Shaw nodded, moving swiftly to her instruments. Livia flinched as the doctor began her scan, her body tense as though she were expecting some sort of painful probe. But Dr. Shaw was gentle, carefully assessing the alien's condition. Daniel watched closely, his eyes lingering on Livia's face, noting the way she winced as the medical equipment passed over her. Livia's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Daniel saw something, a flicker of vulnerability, before she quickly looked away. She was frightened, not just of the situation, but of what might come next. What had she been through? What was she running from? Her vitals are stable, Dr. Shaw said after a few moments, tapping a few buttons on the console. There's some malnutrition, a few bruises and abrasions, but nothing life-threatening. Physically, she's fine for now. Emotionally, well, that's a different story. Daniel nodded, though he wasn't sure how to respond. Livia had been through something far more terrifying than physical wounds. The emotional scars were what he was most concerned about. I'll give her something to help her rest, Dr. Shaw continued, her voice softer now. It's clear she's been through a traumatic experience. We'll need to keep an eye on her mental state. As Dr. Shaw prepared a sedative, Daniel stepped away from the table, his mind still racing. Livia had trusted him. She had begged him for help, for companionship, and he had promised to take care of her. But he had no idea what he had just committed to. The weight of his promise felt heavier now, more real. Once the sedative had taken effect, Livia's body relaxed, and she drifted into a deep sleep. Dr. Shaw gently covered her with a blanket before turning to Daniel. "Captain, I can't say for sure what's going on with her," Dr. Shaw said, her voice grave. "But it's clear she's been through something. Something that broke her. This war she mentioned, it's clearly affected her deeply. I'd recommend giving her some space for now. Let her rest." Daniel nodded. "I'll stay with her." Dr. Shaw didn't argue, though her gaze lingered for a moment. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, but she didn't say anything further. Instead, she gave him a short nod before exiting the medical bay, leaving Daniel alone with Livia. He took a seat next to the bed, watching her sleep. Her chest rose and fell steadily with each breath, and her delicate features, now free of the tension they'd held earlier, looked peaceful. But Daniel knew better. She wasn't at peace. Not truly. His thoughts drifted back to the wrecked ship, to the desolate moon. What had happened to her people? Who had attacked her? And why had she singled him out, asking him to stay with her? It didn't make sense. He sat in silence for a long time, contemplating everything. His mind wandered to his crew, to the mission they had been on, to the path they had been traveling. And now everything had changed. The course had shifted, and for better or worse, he was now responsible for an alien woman who had nowhere else to go. His comlink beeped, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from the ship's main console. "Captain Ross," the voice of Lieutenant Maria Silva crackled through. "We've picked up some strange readings. There's something else out there. It might be connected to the distress signal." Daniel's pulse quickened, and he stood up, glancing over at Livia, still unconscious on the bed. He had promised to protect her, to take care of her, but he didn't even know what they were up against. "I'll be there in 5, he replied, his voice steady despite the rising tension. He couldn't ignore this. There was something bigger at play. And if Livia was right about her people being in danger, if the war she mentioned was real, they were about to be thrust into the heart of something far darker than he could have ever imagined. As he left the medical bay, he cast one last glance at Livia. The bond between them, fragile as it was only just beginning to form. What would happen if he couldn't protect her from whatever was coming next? What if this partnership would cost them both more than they were ready to pay? The answers would have to wait. For now, there was a new danger to face, one that would test everything they had just begun to understand. Daniel's footsteps echoed down the metallic corridors of the Star Wing, his mind swirling with a mix of confusion and anticipation. The message from Lieutenant Maria Silva had been brief but clear. There was something out there, something they hadn't accounted for. The sensors had detected an anomalous energy reading, consistent with the signature of a large ship, or something far more dangerous. As he approached the bridge, Daniel's thoughts briefly flickered to Livia. She was still in the medical bay, resting under Dr. Shaw's care, her fragile form tucked beneath the blanket. The bond between them was still new, still unformed in many ways. But his mind kept returning to the plea in her voice, the desperation that had driven her to seek him out. He couldn't turn his back on her. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. The bridge crew was already at their stations when Daniel entered, and Silva quickly turned to face him. "Captain," she said, her voice laced with urgency, "we've been tracking the anomaly. It's not just a passing signal. It's coming closer. We're estimating its trajectory, and it looks like it's heading directly for us. Do we have a visual?" Daniel asked, settling into the captain's chair. "No visuals yet," Silva replied. "But the energy readings are escalating. The signature matches something we've never encountered before. It's not from any known species or faction." "Captain," Daniel's brow furrowed. "What do we know about it? Can we identify its origin?" Silva shook her head, her face tight with frustration. "It's too complex. The readings are like nothing in our database. But it's unlike anything we've encountered, Captain. Whatever it is, it's powerful. Too powerful to ignore." Daniel's mind raced as he glanced over at the comm station. "Any sign of the ship that attacked Livia?" "Nothing," Silva replied. "We've scanned the area, but no other vessels are showing up. Either they're cloaked or they've already moved on." All we have is the signal from the anomaly. A deep sense of unease settled over Daniel. The wreckage, Livia's desperate plea, and now this. An unknown threat barreling toward them. Couldn't all be a coincidence. Can we outrun it? Daniel asked, his voice low but firm. Silva hesitated for a moment before responding. With the Starwing's speed? Maybe. But Captain, if we engage with it, we risk exposing ourselves to whatever it is. This isn't just a routine distress call. It's something else. Something we don't understand. Daniel took a deep breath, weighing the options. Running wasn't an option. Livia needed them, and he needed answers. They had no choice but to face whatever was coming. We'll have to engage, he said, his voice resolute. Get the crew ready. I'll be in the command center in 15 minutes. The crew began to shift into action, preparing the ship for whatever was about to unfold. Daniel moved toward the command center with purpose, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Every instinct told him to be cautious, but the lingering thought of Livia, vulnerable, terrified, and alone, pushed him forward. He hadn't even told her about the anomaly yet. How could he? She was already fragile, and she had made it clear she couldn't survive on her own. He didn't want to make her fears worse, but at the same time, he couldn't afford to withhold the truth. He needed to face whatever threat loomed on the horizon, and if Livia's warnings about the war were accurate, they were running out of time. As Daniel entered the command center, Lieutenant Silva was already monitoring the new anomaly. The screen in front of her displayed an unsettling mix of fluctuating signals, all centered on one location. It looked like a storm in the depths of space. Chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerously close. Status report, Daniel said, his voice sharp. We're being pulled into its gravitational pull, Silva said, her voice tight with concentration. It's not a traditional ship. It's something organic, alive in some way. It's not making any maneuvers that we can predict, and it's not communicating. We've tried hailing it, no response. Daniel's pulse quickened. It's alive? What the hell does that mean? I don't know, Captain, Silva replied, her fingers flying over the controls. But the readings suggest it's not a ship in the conventional sense. It's biological, almost like it's pulsing, like it's breathing. The idea of a living ship sent a chill down Daniel's spine. What kind of technology, what kind of species could harness something like that? And why was it heading directly toward them? He rubbed his temples, trying to focus. Do we have any offensive capabilities? Nothing that'll be effective against something like this, Silva said. We've got weapons, but they're designed for conventional space combat. This isn't conventional. It's moving too erratically. Daniel nodded grimly. Then we'll have to get creative. Prepare the ship for evasive maneuvers, but don't fire unless I give the order. We need to know what we're dealing with first. A low rumble shook the Starwing as the anomaly drew nearer, its pulsating energy filling the ship with an eerie hum. The entire crew was tense, their movements sharp and coordinated, each person anticipating the first sign of hostility. Captain, Silva said, her voice strained, its changing course, is heading straight for the Starwing. It'll be within range in 5 minutes. Brace for impact, Daniel ordered, his heart hammering in his chest. Lieutenant, get me a visual. Now! A moment later, the bridge screens flickered to life, showing a blurry shape emerging from the depths of space. The object was enormous, shifting like a dark, living mass, its surface writhing in patterns that made Daniel's stomach churn. Tentacles, or what looked like them, extended from its body, and massive energy pulses radiated from its core. It was no ship. It was something far worse. Before Daniel could react, a harsh alarm blared, signaling an incoming transmission. It was a signal, faint but unmistakable. A voice, familiar and soft, came through the comms. Captain, it was Livia. Her voice, strained and weak, cut through the noise of the ship. She was awake. Please listen, asterisk. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The voice was desperate, terrified. It's coming for you? The war, the enemies. They're here, asterisk. The ship's crew exchanged uneasy glances as the creature loomed closer. "Livia!" Daniel shouted, his eyes wide in alarm. "What do you know? What's going on?" But the transmission was cut off suddenly, the screens flickering, as though something had blocked it. The ship trembled once again as the living entity collided with the Starwing's shields, sending a shockwave through the hull. This was no ordinary fight. The war Livia had spoken of, the enemies that had driven her to seek a partner, everything was coming to a head, and the Starwing was caught in the middle. Daniel didn't have time to process it all. He had to act. "Now, all hands, prepare for battle," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. The Starwing groaned under the pressure as the living entity outside battered its shields. The ship shuddered, its hull vibrating with each pulse of energy that radiated from the dark mass outside. Daniel could feel the tension rippling through the crew as they scrambled to maintain control. But their training was inadequate for this kind of assault. They had no reference point for a sentient, biomechanical ship of unknown origin. "Shields are holding for now, Captain," Silva shouted from the tactical station, her fingers dancing over the controls. "But the energy readings, they're spiking. The pressure's building too fast. We won't last long if this keeps up." Daniel's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay focused. This wasn't just about the ship. It was about Livia and the war she had spoken of. The mysterious entity outside the Starwing was tied to her past, and whatever was coming, they weren't prepared for it. "Can we open a communication channel with it?" Daniel asked, his voice steady despite the mounting fear. "We've tried everything," Silva replied, her eyes scanning the control panels. "There's no response. It's almost as if it's ignoring us, or it can't communicate with us." A terrible thought crossed Daniel's mind. What if this entity wasn't a foe they could fight off? What if it was simply looking for something? Perhaps someone. Livia had warned them, but they still didn't understand what was at stake. He had to find out. "Prepare a shuttle," he said, making a snap decision. "I'll go out there and try to establish contact. We need to understand what we're dealing with." Silva turned toward him, disbelief flashing across her face. "Captain, you can't be serious. We don't even know what that thing is capable of. It's literally alive, biologically active. A shuttle won't even get close without being—" "I'm not asking for your permission, Lieutenant," Daniel cut her off, his gaze hard. "I need to understand, and if that thing's connected to Livia, then I need to know what its intentions are." The room fell silent as Daniel's words echoed in the tense air. He could feel the weight of the crew's apprehension, but his mind was made up. The answers they sought, the answers that could explain the mysterious connection between Livia and this creature, lay outside the ship. Silva hesitated, but she knew better than to argue further. "Aye, Captain," she said finally. "Shuttle prepped. I'll get you to the outer docking bay." As Daniel headed toward the shuttle bay, his thoughts drifted back to Livia. He had promised to protect her, but the deeper they went into this unknown situation, the more dangerous things became. Whatever was out there, whatever force was controlling the living entity, had to have some connection to her. He had to get answers. He couldn't afford to fail her now. The shuttle was already waiting when he arrived, its engines humming quietly in the bay. Daniel climbed in and sealed the hatch. He took a deep breath as the engines powered up, his mind racing with questions. What was it that Livia had warned him about? What was the true nature of the war she had mentioned? And most importantly, what was the creature outside? Was it truly a ship, or something far worse? As the shuttle detached from the Starwing, it was immediately rocked by a violent pulse of energy from the entity outside. The shuttle's sensors flickered, and Daniel's hands gripped the controls with tight urgency. He wasn't sure how much longer the Starwing's shields could hold, and he needed to get close enough to understand what was happening. Ahead of him, the living entity loomed large, its surface shimmering with irregular pulses of light that seemed to ripple and shift. It was like a vast, dark cloud, a living thing that twisted and coiled as if searching for something. The shuttle's cockpit displayed a warning, energy levels rising, critical thresholds approaching. It was clear now that they were on borrowed time. "Stay steady," Daniel muttered to himself, his knuckles white as he steadied the ship. He could feel the pulse of energy in the air, like a heartbeat, resonating through the hull of his shuttle. He had no idea what kind of defense mechanism the creature might possess, but he couldn't afford to second-guess himself. As he approached the dark mass, the shuttle's systems began to glitch, and an eerie hum filled the cockpit. The energy signature from the entity intensified, as if it were drawing him closer, beckoning him in. Then, just as suddenly as the pressure had begun, it eased. The ship was close now, dangerously close. A massive tendril of organic material shot out from the mass, reaching toward him like a clawed hand. Daniel had no time to react as it slammed into the shuttle, sending it into a violent spin. The world outside the cockpit twisted into a blur as the shuttle spun out of control. His instruments flashed red as he struggled to regain control of the craft. He gritted his teeth, his heart pounding in his chest. The last thing he needed was to be knocked unconscious. "Come on! Come on!" he muttered, slamming his fist against the control panel as he fought to stabilize the shuttle. With a final hard pull on the yoke, he managed to right the craft, but it was clear. He was being pulled in, inexorably drawn toward the heart of the living mass. In moments, the shuttle was surrounded by darkness. The living entity enveloped him, wrapping its tendrils around the small craft like a vice. The cockpit's lights flickered, and the hum of the ship became a low, eerie chant. Daniel's chest tightened as a wave of dread washed over him. Then, the ship's systems shut down entirely, leaving him in total darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the silence of space and the terrifying sensation that he was no longer alone. Suddenly, a soft voice echoed through his mind, a voice that was both familiar and haunting. "Captain Ross." Daniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. The voice wasn't coming through the shuttle's comm system. It was inside his head, clear and unmistakable. It was Livia. "Livia," he whispered, his voice trembling. The response was immediate, a flood of emotion, of fear, of something far darker. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was filled with sorrow and regret. "They are here, and they will not stop until I am with them. You cannot save me." The words were chilling, and Daniel's stomach twisted in a knot. He had thought that by coming here he could understand, could find a way to help. But now, he feared he was only drawing closer to a nightmare he couldn't escape. The shuttle lurched once more as the living entity began to pull him deeper into its dark embrace. And as the silence of space swallowed them whole, Daniel realized the truth. He hadn't come to save Livia. He had come to become part of something far more terrifying than he could ever imagine. The shuttle was drawn into the living mass, its hull groaning as the tendrils of the creature wrapped around it like the coils of a serpent. Inside, Daniel struggled to maintain his composure as the overwhelming sensation of being consumed by something ancient, something unfathomable, gripped him. The once familiar hum of the shuttle's systems had been replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the voice of Livia in his mind. "You shouldn't have come," she had said, her words still ringing in his ears, the weight of them heavy in the cold silence of the craft. "They are here, and they will not stop until I am with them." Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he fought to make sense of her words. Who were they? What did she mean by "until I am with them"? The terror in her voice had been unmistakable, and yet, despite her warning, there was a part of him that refused to believe that this was the end. Outside the shuttle, the living entity pulsed like a vast, breathing organism. The tendrils had retreated slightly, leaving the craft suspended in an immense, dark void. There was no sound, no motion save for the undulating rhythm of the creature's pulsations. The creature itself seemed almost aware of him, as if it was waiting for something or someone. "Livia!" Daniel called out into the silence, his voice hoarse. "Where are you? What is this place?" His words felt hollow, swallowed by the emptiness surrounding him. No response came, but the cold dread that had settled in his gut deepened. Whatever was happening, whatever this entity was, it was connected to Livia, and her connection to it was far more than just the alien war she had spoken of. Then, without warning, the shuttle's interior lights flickered and dimmed. The systems on the craft sputtered to life, but they were no longer under his control. A soft hum filled the cockpit, the vibrations flowing through the metal, and the walls seemed to ripple like the surface of water disturbed by unseen forces. The voice of Livia, this time louder, clearer, resonated within his mind. "I warned you, Captain Ross, but you don't understand. You're too close now. You have to leave. You have no idea what they are." The words came with such urgency that they sent a chill down Daniel's spine. The voice wasn't just distant or disconnected. It was tethered to him, as though she was speaking directly from the core of his consciousness. "You are not supposed to be here. You cannot survive what they will do to you." Daniel gripped the controls, his knuckles white as his mind raced. He had to get her out of here. He had to find a way to stop whatever was happening. Suddenly, the shuttle lurched violently, and the world outside the cockpit seemed to shift. The creature's tendrils pulled tighter around the craft, drawing it deeper into its grasp. The ship's systems began to glitch again, the lights flickering as a loud, deep-throated hum reverberated through the shuttle. "Hang on!" Daniel shouted, his voice a mix of frustration and fear. He slammed the controls forward, attempting to break free from the grip of the entity. But it was futile. The shuttle was no longer his to command. The hum grew louder, more intense, until it felt like his bones were vibrating with it. Then, without warning, the shuttle was ripped free from its restraints, and Daniel was thrown forward into the cockpit window. The ship slammed into something invisible, something massive, before coming to a sudden stop. Daniel gasped, his breath ragged, but he couldn't look away. Outside the window, the entity had shifted once again, its pulsating form growing larger, filling his view with a terrifying sense of scale. This wasn't a ship. This wasn't something that could be fought or outrun. It was alive, and it was reaching out for him. Before he could react, the shuttle's comms crackled, and a new voice filled the air. A voice far colder, more detached, as though it had no concern for his survival. "Captain Ross, we have been waiting for you." The words were not in his ears. They were in his mind. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. There was no mistaking the cold authority in that voice. It was as though the entity had found its own way to speak, using his thoughts as a bridge to communicate. The voice continued, its tone almost clinical in its delivery. "You are the first human to be drawn into our embrace. Your species, so fragile, so fleeting. Yet here you are. Here you stand at the threshold of the end." The words hit him like a punch to the gut, the meaning sinking in with horrifying clarity. The entity outside the shuttle wasn't just some alien life form. It was something far older, far more malevolent. And it was aware of him. "Who are you?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "What do you want with me?" "With Livia, we are the end. The echo. The last ones." The voice reverberated through the shuttle, its words soaked with an alien gravity. "We have watched your kind for millennia. The war that Livia speaks of is nothing more than a ripple in the vast, cold sea of existence. She is but a fragment of our design, a messenger. But you are something else. Something we must understand." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He had no answers. All he had were questions. Questions he couldn't even begin to comprehend. "What do you mean? Livia? She's not..." The voice cut him off, its tone sharp, commanding. "Livia is the key. She is part of the whole, part of what you cannot possibly understand. You will never survive this, Captain Ross. No one ever has. The echo takes what it wants. And now, you are part of the echo." Daniel's mind reeled as the shuttle lurched once again, this time gently, as if the entity outside were testing him. It was as though it had decided to toy with him, drawing him further into its web. Livia's voice returned, faint and distant, but the urgency was unmistakable. "You have to leave. Please. They will..." Before she could finish, the shuttle's control systems went dead. The cockpit plunged into darkness, the oppressive silence now broken only by the low hum of the creature surrounding them. Daniel's hands shook as he gripped the chair, trying to maintain focus. The shuttle was no longer in his control, but he refused to give up. There was still a chance. He could still find a way to escape, to save Livia from whatever this was. But as the entity's voice filled his mind once more, Daniel realized that the real battle wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding what the echo was and whether humanity, fragile and fleeting as it was, could even stand a chance against something so ancient, so powerful. And deep inside, he feared that the war Livia had spoken of was just the beginning of something far worse. Captain Ross, the voice whispered again, its coldness seeping into his very soul. Welcome to the echo. Daniel's vision blurred as the darkness closed in, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that the end was closer than he had ever imagined. The shuttle drifted, utterly still in the vast emptiness of the living entity's embrace. The weight of the silence inside the craft felt suffocating, a deep, all-encompassing pressure pressing down on Daniel's chest. His breath was shallow, his heart pounding in his ears, and yet the unnerving calm that surrounded him only intensified his unease. Outside the window, the mass of organic tendrils that surrounded the shuttle was no longer merely a vessel. It was alive, pulsing, throbbing in rhythm with the faint hum that filled the cabin. And then, in the silence, the voice came again. You are a part of us now, Captain Ross. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for the controls, but no matter how much he pressed, the shuttle remained motionless. It was as though the creature, this echo, had swallowed his ship whole, leaving him no recourse but to listen and wait. You cannot escape, the voice continued, its tone more dispassionate now, more certain. You are inside our domain, and inside you are already ours. Daniel's mind raced. He had to think, there had to be a way to break free. He had to get to Livia. He had to understand what was going on, what this thing wanted. This was no longer just about the survival of his crew or his mission. This was about the fate of everything, humanity, the alien races, and whatever had been set in motion when Livia had come to them. Livia, Daniel whispered, half to himself, half hoping she would hear him. The voice did not answer directly, but his body reacted as if it had. He could feel a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Suddenly, he was no longer alone in his thoughts. It was as if an invisible presence filled the shuttle. An energy, a consciousness, that wrapped around his mind like tendrils, pulling him deeper into a shared space that he could not comprehend. Livia, I'm here, Captain Ross, came the faint response, but this time it was different. The voice was distant, disembodied, as though the very fabric of reality itself had begun to warp. You shouldn't have come. I warned you. Now they know who you are and they won't let you leave. You're a part of it now, just like me. Daniel's breath hitched as he felt a deep sense of disorientation. The shuttle was gone, no longer a physical thing. He was somewhere else entirely, submerged in a vast, infinite void. Time had no meaning here. Space had no dimension. The only reality that existed now was the presence of the echo, surrounding him, consuming him. And then he felt it, a sudden flash of coldness, followed by an overwhelming rush of emotion. Fear, sorrow, despair. And then a voice broke through the endless expanse. It was Livia's, but it wasn't quite her. The voice sounded as though it was coming from all directions, but there was no sound, only a presence. This is what they do, Livia's voice echoed, clearer now, but tinged with sadness. They don't take you like the others. They don't kill you. They change you. They turn you into part of their collective memory, into a fragment of their echo. And once you're part of it, there's no going back. Daniel felt his chest tighten, his mind racing. Change you? He didn't understand. This thing had already shown it could manipulate his thoughts, communicate directly in his mind, but this felt different. His connection to Livia was becoming more than just a shared understanding. It was as if he could feel her emotions, her fears, her deepest regrets. Livia, what is this? This? Her voice broke as if she was trying to hold back tears. Is the end of everything. The echo is older than anything you know. It is the end of every civilization it encounters, the last, unending force in the universe. And I was born for it, bred for it. You don't understand what I'm saying, but you will. Daniel's head swam as he tried to focus on her words, trying to make sense of the darkness consuming him. But why? Why me? Why you? Asterisk. You are not the first human to be drawn here, she whispered, her voice distant. They've been watching you. The humans. They've always watched. But I was different. They chose me to bring you here, to make you part of the collective. The war I spoke of is not about us. It's about them. About the echo's awakening. And it's already begun. Daniel's mind reeled. His thoughts spun in 1,000 different directions, struggling to grasp the enormity of what Livia had just revealed. The war she had mentioned was not the war of alien species or human factions. It was the war of survival for existence itself, fought against something much older, much more powerful. And now they were a part of it, whether they wanted to be or not. There's no escape from this, Livia's voice seemed to whisper directly into his soul. We are bound to the echo now. You'll forget who you were. Forget everything. But I'll remember you. Promise. I will. The coldness of her words sent a shudder down his spine. He couldn't accept this. He wouldn't. But as her voice faded, and the presence of the echo seemed to grow stronger within him, he knew that the power it wielded was beyond anything humanity had ever faced. It was vast, ancient, and insurmountable, and he was powerless against it. Then, a new voice, sharp, insistent, spoke through the growing fog in his mind. You are a visitor, Captain Ross. You do not belong here. But your mind, it is fragile, and the echo must break you, reshape you. This is your fate. You will serve the echo, and in doing so you will understand. Daniel's head swam, and he felt a great pressure building in his mind. His vision blurred, his senses overloaded. He was slipping. His mind was unraveling, consumed by the echo's will. He could feel it, the overwhelming urge to submit, to surrender to the vast, endless collective that awaited him. It was becoming harder to hold on, harder to fight the pull. But in that final moment, just as he felt himself slipping into the dark abyss of the echo's consciousness, a single, desperate thought echoed through him. I will not give up. He didn't know how, but he refused to lose himself to this entity. Somewhere, in the fog of his mind, he heard Livia's voice again. Her words were a whisper, a prayer, one last attempt to reach him. Please, don't let them take you. And in that moment, Daniel understood. The battle wasn't over yet. The fight for his mind, his soul, had just begun. Daniel's mind was suspended between two worlds, the pull of the echo growing stronger, the oppressive weight of its presence trying to drag him deeper into its collective consciousness. He could feel it. An endless tide of voices, experiences, and histories beyond reckoning, all vying for his attention, pressing in on his thoughts. The borders of his identity were thinning, fading. But through the haze, through the suffocating grip of the echo, a single spark of defiance burned inside him. I will not lose myself. It was all he could hold on to as his vision swam and his mind threatened to splinter under the crushing weight of the ancient entity. His body felt distant, as though he were no longer tethered to it. The shuttle was a memory, the stars outside a fading dream. There was only the cold, infinite dark of the echo, and the siren call to become one with it. But somewhere, buried deep inside, he could still hear Livia. Her voice was a thread that connected him to reality. Captain Ross, you are strong. Her words broke through the fog of his mind, fragile but real. She was with him, part of him but not lost yet. Her voice was a beacon, cutting through the overwhelming noise, guiding him back. Fight it, Livia whispered. Don't let them take you. Don't let them take us. You have to remember who you are. Remember who we are. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. The flood of thoughts, of memories that weren't his own, tried to drown him. The echo was relentless. It was everything, every thought, every emotion, every person that had ever lived, died, and been consumed. But Daniel's heart beat harder. He could still fight. He could still remember. I remember, he whispered to himself. I remember who I am. With that declaration, the cold, suffocating pressure of the echo seemed to falter. For a moment, just a moment, the voices stilled, as if they, too, were listening. He could feel his own thoughts, his own memories rising through the chaos. His name, his life, his mission, his promise to protect Livia. In the depths of his mind, a vision flashed. Livia, standing before him, her silver-blue eyes wide with fear and hope. She had been the one to warn him, to guide him. She had trusted him. He would not fail her. Livia, I'm not leaving you, Daniel thought, his voice raw, but filled with conviction. I'll find a way. We're not part of them. The presence of the echo recoiled, as if it had felt something foreign, something it could not comprehend. Daniel's sense of self began to reassert itself. The walls of the mind prison that the echo had constructed around him started to crack. He wasn't just a cog in the machine. He wasn't just a part of the collective. He was human, and he would fight for that. A surge of energy rushed through him, igniting his very soul. He could hear Livia's voice again, clearer now, more distinct. Captain Ross, she whispered, her tone no longer filled with fear, but with awe. You're breaking free. You're freeing yourself. Daniel's heart surged. The suffocating darkness receded as he fought to reclaim his mind, his memories, his will. The echo had tried to erase him, to subsume him, but it had underestimated the strength of a human spirit. I remember, Daniel repeated, feeling the weight of his own resolve solidify in his chest. I remember who I am. The shuttle jolted back to life around him, the systems flickering back into operation. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Daniel could feel the controls beneath his hands, the hum of the engines, the warmth of his own breath. The oppressive presence of the echo was still there, still lingering at the edges of his consciousness, but he had broken through. He had torn through the chains that had bound him. He was no longer just a vessel for the echo's will. But the battle was far from over. The voice of the echo returned, this time more agitated, more insistent, and yet there was something unsettling about it, like the entity was struggling, trying to understand. No, you cannot resist. You are ours. No, Daniel replied, his voice strong, unyielding. I belong to myself, and I won't let you take her. I won't let you take anyone. The entity writhed, an energy that seemed to curl and twist, a pulse of frustration and confusion. The voices that had once filled his mind now screamed in discord, their unified force splintering, unraveling. Daniel could feel the strain, the force of the echoes while pressing against his own, but he stood firm. He would not be consumed. Livia's voice was a steady presence, like a hand on his shoulder. You are not alone. We are not alone. It was in that moment of connection that something changed. The darkness outside the shuttle began to shift, the tendrils of the living entity that had once surrounded him now withdrawing, retreating into the void. The entity seemed to recoil as if, for the first time, it realized that it had met something it could not simply absorb. This is not the way, the voice of the echo intoned, its tone laced with frustration and confusion. You are too strong. But Daniel did not back down. He felt Livia's presence, her essence, like a force that grounded him, and he felt a surge of energy, the power of his humanity, his defiance, pushing back against the echo. We are human, Daniel said, his voice steady and unwavering, and we are stronger than you think. There was a shift in the air, an overwhelming silence that fell over the shuttle. The creature's influence, its connection to his mind, seemed to flicker and fade, as if it had been severed entirely. The battle was over. The shuttle, once trapped in the clutches of the echo, now floated in the silence of space, free. Daniel's breath came in shaky gasps as he took in his surroundings. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but the oppressive weight in his chest had lifted. The voices of the echo, once so loud and overwhelming, had gone silent. Livia's voice, soft and filled with relief, whispered through his mind one last time. You did it. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over him. But amid the weariness, there was a quiet triumph. They had won, not just over the echo, but over the impossible. He wasn't alone, and he wasn't defeated. For the first time since he had boarded the Star Wing, Daniel allowed himself a single moment of peace, knowing that the fight was far from over, but for the first time they were in control. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.